Today, I'm excited to be joined by Susan Westwater. If you don't know who Susan is, she's co-author of Voice Marketing, Engaging Customers Through Conversational AI. She's also an AI strategist and founder of Pragmatic Digital, an AI agency that helps businesses train their teams and develop AI strategies. Susan, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited you're here. Today, Susan and I are going to explore how to use AI to develop practical marketing strategies for any business. Now, before we get into these practical use cases for marketing and developing strategy with AI, I'd love to hear a little bit of your story. How in the world did you get into AI?
It's a funny story. So I have lived through my career every major tech wave. So the conversion to web, mobile, social, all the things. And all of those impacted how we grow. And then when Scott and I saw AI coming, we kind of said to each other, you know what, this is going to be a big deal and let's learn about it while we can. And so that was back in 2017. So it's a while ago. But for me, it's really personal. I was nearly a medievalist. I don't know if you knew that. A few credits short.
I don't even know what that is.
So a medievalist is literally someone who specializes in the medieval history and all of the culture and all of those things.
Cool.
Yeah, proper liberal arts major happening right here. But I'm a few credits short. But you study as part of that how information flowed before the printing press. So things you see would be like troubadours, words of mouth, human conversation. That was how news happened. And then when the printing press happened, at first only the elite benefited because it was all in Latin. And it wasn't until Dante started to write in basically local vernacular of Italian that we started to get real access of like, here's what printed word can do. And what's kind of amazing to me is I've seen this parallel with AI, especially like conversational and voice, is this notion of democratizing information, making insights accessible, and just powering better decisions. And it's kind of amazing to see they always say whatever is old is new again. That is something that we've seen. So it's been super interesting to be able to help folks kind of unlock those things and be able to make better decisions so that, I see AI as a decision partner now, not just a co-pilot.
So tell us a little bit about that journey. So when did you decide to go all in?
So back in 2017, we decided we're going to go all in. We're going to make this consultancy. We're going to focus on this because as we had gotten, innovation had been something that we had always been a part of. It was one of those moments of like, why not us? And very similar to the times when I was told web is a fad, or this is a fad, or even having to justify putting web addresses on major packaged goods brands. Mm-hmm. Seeing that type of behavior happening again, it was like, you know what? I'm not going to fight this of trying to put it through here. I'm going to dive deep. We're going to learn about it and we're going to make sure that people are building the right thing. Because in the early days, it was about the tech and how it was being built and folks were experimenting, but it was also where we started to say, hey, let's build the right things. Let's ask the questions that we wished we had asked during all of these other major moments. And so that was when we went and started to learn. We were going to conferences, reading every book we could get our hands on. And then actually that's what also pushed us to write our own book to say, you know what, we've spent 7 years learning about this. Let's share that with others.
So tell me about what you're doing today now with AI, specifically, like who are you help working with and all that fun stuff?
So we are helping primarily, we have a focus on marketers, but we also have a focus then in manufacturing, healthcare, and CPG, just because that's where our background is. We're used to working in regulated and unregulated industries. So we have just been helping a variety of different, basically organizations with a mindset of, we see this opportunity, how do we tap into it? And how do we even implement this from the start so that we're doing it in a smart way and not kind of a randomized or frenetic way.
What I love about the story and the journey that you shared is this concept of democratization of knowledge. The printing press obviously allowed insights, originally the Bible, right, through the Gutenberg press, and eventually all sorts of other things to be shared. But now AI takes what I call secret knowledge, right? Like, for example, you have to pay a lot of money to go to an attorney. right? You have to pay a lot of money to talk to a specialist, like a healthcare specialist. And now this information is effectively available to everyone without having to like have anybody translate it. Like, you read these journal articles and stuff and it's like your eyes roll back. But now this knowledge, this secret knowledge, as I call it, is available to all. And that's what I love about AI. And I know it threatens a lot of people's businesses because they've developed their entire career, especially people who have access to special knowledge, and they feel like that knowledge is now available for the entire world. But I look at the flip side of it. The entire world now has access to knowledge that frankly was hard to get access to before. And just like the printing press, this is going to open up a renaissance of opportunity. Don't you agree? For those that understand how to leverage it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a saying, wizards are for Hogwarts. This is definitely like the anti-wizard situation. The gatekeeping is different, but we now have this opportunity of, instead of spending all this time getting access to this information, we get to apply our brains and find out what are these insights or what are these ways that we can do things. And that frees up so much more opportunity as long as we know how to recognize it.
Love it. Okay. So big question here. Why should businesses have an AI strategy in particular and not just adopt very specific tools? Said another way, if people apply what we're going to be talking about today, what's possible? What's the upside?
So the really quick soundbite is, AI tools are like instruments. So without a score or conductor, it can just be noise, or it's going to be a singular effort as opposed to the incredible symphony that you hear when all of the instruments come together. And I think where we're at right now is there's companies that think they're behind because they haven't picked the right tools. And then there's other companies that think they're on track because they have an AI task force and a policy. But the reality is just they haven't decided what winning looks like. And that's where strategy is really helpful. And having a strategy puts in this plan that will enable an organization to be able to, I like to call it operationalizing AI, so that you're reaping benefits from not just the individual contributor, that person who's experimenting with ChatGPT, where you can actually start to operationalize it so that the team can understand how we're winning and also how the organization is. And so that way they can actually start to go from, here's what we can do with AI, to then what we should do. And then when we put some realities of prioritization of resources and et cetera, what we actually will do. And that gives you an incredibly powerful guidebook that makes sure that what you're working on makes sense and that you're also moving towards a roadmap that's going to give you the learning and the results you need. And you're not just going to be, we have X failed pilots. We actually have learned something, but we've also had some wins along the way.
I love this. And I'm a strong believer that strategy trumps just, reacting to the latest features that come out from these tools, right? And what we're going to talk about today, folks, is going to be very intriguing. We're going to go through different kinds of ways that you can develop strategy that you could apply from a marketing lens to your business. And we're gonna really dig in deep, and I'm very, very excited about this. But I just want to reiterate, any tool without a strategy is just a tool, right? Mm-hmm. Like with a butter knife, you could what can you do with a butter knife? Lots of things, right? But you don't use a butter knife if you don't understand that it's specifically for butter, right? And so you need to have a strategy, right? And it may be that you're using the wrong tool, or you're not thinking through things before you go into the tools because you haven't thought about the higher level order things, which is strategy. So I'm excited to see what we unlock today. So let's begin with wherever you want to start. Where do we want to begin here?
Sure. So let's talk about strategy. I mean, there are folks who coming up on the agency ranks of, are you strategic? And no one bonks you on the head with a magic wand and says you're strategic. Right. It's how we think about these priorities and guardrails. That's actually what's going to. So to keep it simple, because AI can get pretty complex if you start getting in the weeds, we like to think of it as a framework of 4 pillars. One is get business. One is about delivering excellence of, let's be honest, you're not in the business of AI. I am.
And by the way, let's not reveal all the pillars just yet.
Yes,
let's go one at a time. That'll be better for our audience. So let's start with that. Let's start with the get business pillar. Let's unravel that.
Sure. And so from a marketing perspective, when I think about that, that's how do you acquire smartly?
Okay.
So you're not just going to be looking at like, how do I automate lead gen? You're looking at how do I optimize signals to noise? So that can be something of behavior-based personalization. And you can do that with, like, we've done that with Voiceify, is a platform that we've used, and it's a conversational AI platform, but it allows us to use voice-based interactions. And through voice-based interactions, you can hear, how does someone talk about something? How are these like, what questions are they asking? And those enable me then to then answer those questions relevantly, which then helps me start to hit that personalization of way deeper than what's your name, what's your account. We're able to do that. However, that's also an important part, and we'll talk about that later in one of the other pillars about how that helps. But that's how we're able to move forward and think about those things of, how do I engage my prospects? How do I collect them, and how do I show them that when I'm, the golden 3 questions of content, right, are, is this the right place? Can they help me with what I need to do? My problem? And then why should I? If we can find out those signals and answer those questions in a relevant and short manner using these tools such as like a Voiceify, or even we use Lindy .ai, which helps us create some additional CRM automation. These are ways that we are then able to talk to someone in their language, not what I think, and I'm not projecting on them. I'm letting them signal to me what they want to know.
Okay, so let's unravel this a little bit.
Sure.
So this first pillar that we're focusing on is how to get business, right? So help me like unravel before we get into the tool. I want to dig in a little bit on the tools that you mentioned, but like help me connect the dots between using AI and getting business, because I feel like we might have skipped over something there, and I just want to unravel that a little bit. Does that make sense?
For sure. So the first part of that is, we look at these pillars as a way of prioritizing what we're doing and giving me the opportunity to say no. So if
Okay.
I am looking at ways of where my challenge is, I need a pipeline, or
Okay.
I need to improve speed to lead, I need to do these things. That is how we then start to look of where AI might fit.
Okay.
And that can be in a range of using tools, or even looking at my process, and saying, this is where AI will help me, because there is something here that is a major time suck that keeps me from being able to build that better follow-up, to have those more in-person conversations. Where are ways that AI can almost be my sales assistant to help me pre-qualify and look at things from that sense? So that's really getting into brass tacks of kind of what those pieces are, but it is looking at those processes and those opportunities for, how am I going to get more business? And that can even be onboarding. We're just talking about lead gen and acquiring, but it's all of those those processes that we use. How can I make them smarter, and how can I make myself smarter by asking better questions, because I'm working through AI, so some things are covered off on.
Okay, so give me an example of this. You mentioned Voiceify and Lindy.ai. Like, help people understand what the heck those things do, and maybe how you've used them or how your clients have used them.
Sure, absolutely. So I have a case study that was really interesting with Voiceify. We had a utility company, that local utility company here in Chicagoland area. They have 2 different types of programs. They have a business program and a residential program. And of course, they support local sports teams. And therefore, there we're talking, in between periods or quarters, or even in between plays, they had talked about ways that they could support either one of those paths. You only have 30 seconds to cover off on that. By using Voiceify, we were able to create an experience where all someone had to remember was the name of the utility, and ask about those questions, and be able to then trigger into, do you want to learn more about business or residential? And making it that much easier for them to go from radio into a conversation where then they could start to learn more information about those programs. So it was connecting those different channels, but it allowed them to be able to accomplish a small amount and drive traffic to something that would give them a lot more, as opposed to remembering a longer web address or something along those lines.
Okay, so Voiceify is spelled Voicify. So
Correct.
like functionally, what the heck does it do? Does it listen to actual conversations, or what does it do exactly?
So what it does is it actually allows you to build like a voice experience. So that could be either on the phone, that could be using IVR. And actually, they even have a part that works with drive-throughs in the restaurant space, or even in healthcare of it basically being either telephone or your mobile device or things like that. And it allows you to just talk to it.
Oh,
So
it
yeah,
sounds like a
so
person, and it
yeah, so
sounds like a person.
yeah, and it can. Yeah, it depends. That's a whole other conversation about what does
Yep.
that agent sound like and how does it
Right.
present. But
Right.
at the bare minimum, yes, it sounds like a person, or it sounds like something that you're talking to, as opposed to having to type something in or remember something. And it is able to do that quickly because it can scale. So I'm not waiting for someone to pick up the phone. It is able to take my order, make my reservation, answer my basic questions before it then hands me off to, say, an agent. And therefore, I'm not waiting on a hold line. I'm able to just get at that information.
Huh. And what about Lindy, Lindy?
Sure. So Lindy starts to move towards that notion of agentic AI. So
Okay.
when we think about AI, and this is a helpful way to think about it, is there's human in the loop, which means I'm the orchestrator and I'm directing and managing. There's human on the loop, where I am the human who is verifying or double checking things before I let them go. And then there's human out of the loop. And out of the loop is more of this autonomous, it's learning, it's following a workflow, it's adjusting as needed. And Lindy allows me to make agents that are then capable of performing tasks such as, can you set up this meeting? And that acts like my virtual assistant.
Huh.
Or it can do something along the lines of lead generation of, give me a dossier about this prospect I'm about to speak with, or I'm prepping for. That way, then you have sort of this assistant who is able to give you what you need, because you're able to request it and you're able to set up these workflows so that they are repeatable.
Okay, cool. So let me just kind of echo back what I'm hearing you say. We're talking about 4 different pillars here. This first pillar is really about getting business or qualifying leads. And then the question is like, how can AI assist, right?
Yep.
And in the case of Voiceify or Lindy, Lindy.ai, they can do different kinds of things that basically can allow you to augment, if you will, some of your manual processes so that AI is kind of in the loop and allowing these things to be more efficient. Is that the essence of what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
And it allows you to do whatever dossiers or any of that time you spent researching, you're able to drop that down because you have your tried and true questions you ask. And then it can even say, well, we've learned these other things. How about adjusting? So
Love
it's
it.
really helpful.
Love it. Okay, let's go into your next, what's next?
So what's next is kind of when we look about delivering excellence, or we even think about from the idea of a marketer, that's converting faster.
Okay.
But the idea is to look at, how do I understand when to follow up? How do I balance that? And so the idea is to kind of look at things that will help me be able to continue conversations, and also be able to stay relevant and not feel like that canned stuff. I mean, I think we've all been bombarded by the follow-ups from bots that don't make sense. But it's making sure that you're able to personalize things so that they resonate. And it's more than just first name, last name. Again, it is looking at ways of helping to cover off on, hey, these are the things we talked about. These are the next follow-ups. Or these are those pieces of engagement that I'm able to have a proper sequence because I can figure out where my lead scoring is happening.
Now, before we get into kind of some of the tools that you recommend, what are the channels in which these generally work? Are we talking email? Are we talking DMs on Instagram? Are we talking about LinkedIn messages? Like, what are the different spaces where follow-up can take place?
So it can it's multi-channel. If it's
Okay.
digital, there's ways to do that. And there's even now opportunity to use phone. I always caution with using phone because let's be real. The idea when we use these bots is not to pretend to be humans. We're enhanced humans. So we're not replacing. So that's where I am always a bit of cautious about
Right.
how much you're going to be doing that automation or adding in this bot. But it's helpful to have that follow-up assistant that's going to be able to handle your repetitive tasks, or those things that you kind of bog through that you have to get done and you need to do that. but it's a way of freeing you up then to either have more in-person conversations or some of those other things, especially as like teams of one, or I think we always are getting asked to do more with less.
So how smart are these things? And then let's talk about some examples.
Yeah.
Like, do they remember where the conversation was last time, like a human, or like how intelligent are these follow-up systems we're talking about here?
They can be as sophisticated as you are comfortable.
Oh,
So, and I think that's an important thing to highlight of what you build, and then you can iterate off of these workflows. So like reply.io lets me be able to personalize emails and put things through where I know where it's at in the sequence, and I can always check into it. It's not that revolutionary when we think about how HubSpot works, where you can see where someone's at. So it does remember those conversations, but what's nice is that it also sees if there's replies, and then saying what do we do next, and then also we'll then use those as signals for then lead nurturing, so that it isn't again just email 1, email 2, email 3. We can get a little more sophisticated in how we structure what email 2 might be. I don't just have 2A or 2B. There are certain things that I can empower it to do.
Okay, you mentioned reply.io. That sounds like it's an email tool predominantly. Is that correct?
Yes, it is predominantly. Yeah.
Do you have any other tools that you recommend for this kind of work?
So Exceed is another one that we use. And again, I'm going to let everyone know I'm being intentional about being sensitive to not talking about too many enterprise products.
Right.
We all know where they exist. They've got plenty of marketing dollars, but B, some of these also have some free trials that you can use as well to be a little bit more nimble and experiment. Exceed allows you to also do email, chat, and SMS, especially if in the inappropriate channels. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about big dollar deals, not really sure we're going to be doing text, but there are situations where it makes sense to then follow up with someone. So it is a much more two-way, especially because people will sometimes reply to text a lot more off the cuff.
So Exceed.ai is an enterprise tool, or is Reply an enterprise tool? Or
neither of those are enterprise. They actually have an approachable plan costs. So that way then you can kind of kick the tires a little bit on them.
Do you have an example of how you or a client have employed these things?
So we use Reply, and we use that to be able to set up some of our structure of how we're talking about things, or when someone's asking us, because we'll get questions, especially in our lead gen forms, everything from do you do public speaking to how do I get started with AI to engagements. So we use that as a way to automate some of our follow-up sequences, because we have those signals. So that way then we can also then be able to continue following up with them in a way that makes sense and is a little more to the point.
So tell us a little bit about how smart that is and how it works. Like, is it like ManyChat was back in the day where you had to think of every conceivable situation, or is it a little bit more sophisticated?
We actually get to be a little more sophisticated these days because generative AI is a thing.
Yeah.
And that's what makes life awesome. There are certain things where the brain exhaustion of every permutation, it actually helps figure out through fuzzy logic how we are able to identify if someone says, I need to get started, we know what path that is, as opposed to if someone says, now what? Or things like that. They don't have to be like for like the if thens become much more vague. And I appreciate that, because then I can also see, hey, this is how these folks are talking about it. And therefore I also know how to signal that outwards when I'm saying, yes, I'm talking to you. I heard you. And I'm not just going to keep using technical jargon if you're not starting and meeting me with that.
Okay, so a couple thoughts that might be going through people's brains is some people have been on websites where they have like a live interactive chatbot that they can interact with. Other people have very experienced, especially been around for a while, that you have to fill out a form. Are these generally tools that are form fills or inbound email inquiries, or are they interactive, kind of like a chatbot? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It can be a mix. Because at certain points when someone's on our website, they probably don't necessarily want to, they might just want to fill out a form, or they might want to go through the chatbot. You can do either option. There's other times though where it's like, no, that shouldn't be through like a chat. That should be through an email or something like that. We can kind of toggle that depending on the significance. And that's where, I'll be honest, that's where I get excited as a content person of content strategy of like, we can actually behave like a human normally would and not just get stuck and forced into one type of communication.
So does this mean in particular with this reply.io tool, or do you have to use different tools to be able to pull this off?
Right now, it always depends on how sophisticated you want to get.
Right.
There are some pieces where you can put two things together, but like with Playa, we do all right, I think, I would like to say. But as you look at it getting more complex, then you might layer a couple things. It also depends on how clean and ready your data is too.
Got it. Okay. So far, here's what we've covered. First two pillars of your strategy are, what are some ways you can use AI to help you get business in the first place, right? We're talking about generating leads or even outreach. We didn't actually talk about outreach. Are there AI tools that can actually do outreach for you?
You can use Voiceify for that as well, of where you're putting your outreach out to that way. Reply also is good for cold emailing.
Okay.
If I do a combination, that is a combination of where, let's say I use Seamless to help me with finding my prospects, and then I want to start engaging those conversations. I can start to put those two together of, this is a cold email. I don't have as much context. Let's start that conversation differently than if it was a hot lead of someone I spoke with at a conference or someone who downloaded a piece of content off of our website.
You said Seamless. Is that referencing a tool that maybe you didn't mention yet?
I did not mention it yet.
Talk to us about that real quick.
Yeah. So seamless.ai is essentially, it just allows you to take it's a more automated way of being able to find prospects. And finding out information, and also sometimes getting contextual. Like I like to combine that, and then maybe I'll look at ChatGPT if I'm looking for an agency person, looking at a client and say, "Oh, who are their agencies right now? Okay, I see who they're working with right now. Do they have a review going on? Okay, then maybe we won't talk to them right away. Or if we do reach out to them, it'll be in an incredibly non-aggressive, top of funnel way." So
I just want to pause for the sake of the listeners. You're learning from Susan that there are tools that are probably behind the scenes powered by some of the same large language models that we use, like Claude or ChatGPT, but they've developed these really sophisticated applications that we're narrowing in on, right? So far what we've learned from Susan is you've got to, first of all, understand what's the objective. In this case, we've been talking about how to convert faster with this particular example. And then once you understand what the objective is, then you can begin applying the right tools. And sometimes the right tools are specialty tools that were designed to do that application, which probably make it so much easier than just using a broad tool. Is that right? Do you want to talk about that just briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was hearing someone talking the other day, last week, we were at a conference, and someone said, "Oh, that's just a chat, a wrapper around ChatGPT." And my feeling at half the time is, so what? Having the focus of having someone who's already thought through a very set workflow that I can use and take advantage of, that takes man hours off of me figuring that out and how to string that together. So if I'm clear about what the outcome is I want it to be, or the thing I need, I like to be able to look for tools, because why build it all? Like, we are at a point now where the technology is sophisticated enough that I don't need to be a Python programmer. I can see where Python programmers or very talented information science degree folks have thought through, hey, this is how this workflow works. And I know that then I can also be assured that they've probably also thought through all of the information security challenges or HIPAA compliance and all that.
Well, and in addition, they probably have lots of feedback from their clients, and they're iterating, they're coming out with new features, they're making it better. They know when the models have upgraded on the back end and decide which ones and to test them. And frankly, it's just the easier way to go, right? Yeah. Because you can say there's only a few companies that power all email in the world, right? But you still go through email service providers because you don't want to have to deal with all the hassle of all the other things, right? So there is value in having these software products that were specifically designed for an intent, so you don't have to worry about it, which I love. And that's the exciting unlock that hopefully is happening for people. Okay, let's go to your next pillar.
So that next pillar is, so then Okay, let's say we've made that sale. So we call it engaging better, or it's keeping that business, because
Okay.
there's a lot of folks. Well, I mean, a lot of when we're looking at the acquisition or the customer journey or whatever, or flywheel, it's always, okay, so we've got the sale, then what? So there are ways then for us to start looking and using these tools for churn forecasting, or, hey, how do I show them that what they purchased is actually something that was really helpful? It's especially as like an agency person, help me with the reporting, help me to know what reports or what market conditions are happening, and that I can be that much more proactive without having to spend any more time, because I spend a lot of time reading every trade journal, market watch, all of those things. How are ways that then I can make it so that I'm thinking about my client's business without giving up all of my soul, quite frankly, or thinking about right now, I think the discussion I heard just this morning was, we were talking about AI of all things, but then they had said, I don't have time. I have to deal with tariffs. So how do we make sure that we stay relevant and say, well, here's a way that AI can help you with that tariff navigation, or here's a way that we can strengthen some other part of the experience or the value benefit. So that way, then it offsets the fact that, you know what, you're not going to be able to absorb that tariff. So it's kind of thinking through those types of things. And so there's tools that we use that look also at like churn forecast of, hey, we're seeing where someone's at. There's a chance that they might not renew, or they might not. Essentially, they're getting to a point where we need to see that they're probably going to be reconsidering. How do we stay top of mind? How do we make sure and remind them, yes, we would like you to renew, or yes, we would like you to repurchase? This is an opportunity through AI, that we can kind of look predictively if we look at usage, or we look at attitudes, or we can even look at what general sentiment is. Be able to then retain those folks. And there's ways of covering off on that with a client where we were looking for, I can predict, I know what you've purchased. I know that when you're calling my customer service now, I know that you are, because I just saw a flag that shows me whatever it was you purchased didn't arrive in time. So chances are I can be proactive when you call, or I can even let you know ahead of time. Again, that makes it a richer experience, and then continues to deliver so that someone will stay loyal.
Okay, before we get into the tools, I know people are probably thinking what I'm about to ask, which is these AI tools sound like I have to give them personally identifiable information of my customers. And that's going to be a big red flag in a lot of people's brains. So help everybody understand what they need to navigate on that front. Because if we're doing, churn forecasting and all that kind of stuff, we're giving a lot of stuff to the AI models that's confidential. So how do we wrestle with that? And sell that internally, you know what I mean?
Yes. So first of all, when we even start discussing going down these paths and we're building our roadmap, we make sure that number one, there is a representative from legal, and we also make sure that someone from IT is involved, because that tech stack is going to be what's going to also tell us what we've got going on. What can we even actually rationally do? It sounds complex, but it's not. It's just bringing them into the conversation earlier. That ensures then that as we're doing the vetting and the requirements, and before we even start to sign a contract with a tool, we're able to say, these are our requirements. What will you meet them? And if so, then how, essentially, what are those requirements? You're going to meet them. How are we going to implement that? And then what does that look like? And sometimes that may mean that what we're looking to do may take 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And we crawl, walk, and run, because to your point, we have to stay our data is precious. We need to make sure that we've got information security set. I actually think that's going to be one of the biggest career choices come in the upcoming years, of how to make sure that that's happening. But also a lot of that also will be guided by the fact that you should have a data policy already. And so following that, these tools, and when you talk with their sales folks, they're able to say, yes, these are the things we can promise, because everyone clearly knows out in this world that if you're in healthcare, it's got to be HIPAA compliant. If you're in financial services, it has to be Loctite. So we make sure that those are actually part of the, I'll be honest, it's a non-starter if they can't even speak to that.
Okay, so what we're talking about here obviously is for the bigger businesses that are listening, and we're going to get into some tools for that. But I just want to ask first, for the smaller businesses that don't do churn forecasting, are there basic tools or maybe other features built into the existing tools they're already using, like maybe HubSpot, Marketo, or maybe like other email service providers that can maybe layer in some sort of monitoring or insights or any of that kind of stuff that might be a little bit more approachable for the smaller business?
So there is a tool, Amplero, that you can put over top of that. I think HubSpot does allow you to have some of that information of where you're able to set in those workflows. I know for sure Lindy also allows me those reminders of when to be looking at those things. I do like Amplero though, just because it is, again, we were talking about specific, that's its job. That's why they created it. So that makes it easier for me to be able to use that and actually have access. We're not a huge company. We still use these types of tools so that we can do that.
So Amplero is Amplero. So what does that do exactly? Just help people understand.
Sure. So basically it applies machine learning to that predictive marketing. So it is to add that scoring, customer segmentation, all of those things of taking that data. So assuming you have normalized data to some degree, it allows you to be able to process it from that way. And they do have security places, security. And when you have an account, that is your account. It's not like it's training from other data. It works within there. So that way then it can start to help you highlight and say, identify, hey, these are a risk, or here's some lookalike marketing that will also help me understand this is someone who might be right for an upgrade or something along those lines.
So fundamentally, what I think I'm hearing you say is you've got your customer relationship management system or some email system that you're using that's got all this data in it, and Amplero sits on top of it and somehow notices like, hey, this person has not been opening your emails, or this person has not been actively visiting your website in a while. You might want to send them a coupon or something like that. Is that kind of the stuff we're talking about, or is it more sophisticated than that?
No, it can be like that. Can be that simple. I mean, let's be honest. You can make a huge difference just with that. I'll be honest. A funny story, and this has nothing to do with AI, but we forget some of the importance of those small things.
Right.
I used back in my DR days when I was doing direct response campaigns. We learned that by investing, and the volume was there to do this, that putting a 2-cent Post-it note on a letter would actually lift like 20%. And it's a simple little thing that was a reminder that said, remember, and I think it was remember to apply here or call this number. And that actually was a 20% lift. Some of these things that we're doing to be effective don't have to be great, huge efforts. We can start a little bit simple and then get more sophisticated. And we have to keep that in mind, because as we're experimenting with these things, that's also what helps us we can very much say is, do we get a lift from that? And that also helps us stay really true to the idea of a business objective.
When we were prepping, you mentioned something called retention science. Do you want to mention that at all?
You know what? Amplero, retention science, they're very similar creatures.
Okay.
So I mean, you could look at either one of them of your flavor. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's go to your next pillar, unless there's something else we forgot to mention here.
No.
Feel free to move on. Okay.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think that covers, that's a huge piece of it, of just making sure you're looking at that. The only other thing I would just say is there's also an opportunity of not just looking at that churn, but like we have this is a much larger client, but with some products, even especially like in the medical device field, there's a really long amount of time between purchase and then repurchase. And, an old school content marketing statement is, content makes the wait shorter. There are ways within here that you're not just looking at churn, but it's also giving you your signals of when to re-engage to stay top of mind without being spammy. And that's a way of just continuing, again, to keep that relationship going. And that could be anything from service reminders to simple things of customer service, or just even just a general piece of information on how they might be maintaining their product. That's obviously can be completely customized based off of your industry. But there's also that opportunity as well of where, when you're thinking about your outreach, that isn't just happening in the upfront. That can also happen after purchase.
Love it. So what is that last pillar? Or did we
So
already talk about that? We didn't talk about that.
we didn't talk about that yet.
Okay.
So across all of this then these are all outward facing pieces, right? These are all, I mean, they might be agent assist, but there's this notion of what we call operating leaner. And that's just a simple thing of like, I actually heard this statement the other day of, if your team spends hours preparing their reports, you're not really data driven, you're data drained. This whole notion of, how do I get at that information? How do I see now, like, how do I know what good looks like? Now, how do I know I've got good happening? And so there's lots of ways that we can just ask versus having to remember all of the processes of, how do I pull that from Tableau? How do I pull that from HubSpot? How do I pull that from all my reporting software? There are things that go over the top that help me just ask a natural question. Like I had said, of like, how did we perform in the Southwest region? Or where, how is my client regional looking? Or numbers like that when we look at being global. Or what do inventory numbers look like? These are all questions I'm just asking them. I'm not having to type it in or things like that. It's so simple of being able to use my own natural language. So there's ways that we can have dashboards that help us. Also, capturing the information of, like, in manufacturing, a big challenge is, as folks retire, 20 years of knowledge is walking out the door. Mm-hmm. How do I capture that? How do I turn that into an automated, accessible SOP or lessons learned or reference guide? Capturing that type of information is really helpful. Or how do I make it easier for someone to check, what is the policy on this? Or what is my AI policy? How do we make it so that it is easy to reference, but isn't always nagging in the background? Because at the end of the day, we're all kind of like children. And if the more you nag, the more someone's going to tune something out. So how do we make those things more accessible? And that's where we look at where AI can do those things. And that can be everything from conversational assistants that are in a closed system that no one else can access to.
So wait, what is that? Explain what you just said. Is that like the equivalent of a private bot, for like a chat bot?
Absolutely. It can be a private chatbot or your own private, for lack of a better term, your own private Alexa, where I can have something in my office that I'm asking questions to, but I'm asking it, it's locked away. So it's behind firewalls. So I don't have to worry about espionage or someone saying the wrong thing. It's got some firewalls in place.
Is that something you have to build, or is there companies that you can just buy that? Right
there are some places like you can actually be able to add that onto other conversational solutions, or there's even ways that you can use, like, an example, a real simple one is Looker Studio, which is Google plus conversational AI that allows you to be able to ask those questions of what's going on your dashboards and being able to do that and tracking in real time. There are other systems that are in place where you can use a conversational assistant. There's a couple tools where perhaps you're building it in the sense of you're putting the workflow and the information in there, but it's really simple and it's no code. So you don't need like a development team, and IT can assist of like, this makes sense. But the reality is that it's not nearly the heavy lift that it once was of putting some of those things together.
Okay, so Looker Studio is Google's data studio, just renamed. Yep. And I know it has some like ability to just ask it some basic AI questions. Are there any tools that you recommend on this conversational AI layer? Did we already talk about that? I'm just curious, like, if people want to try to mess around with that.
Sure. If you want to get from a standpoint of building those assistants, there's a company called VoiceFlow.
VoiceFlow.
Yeah, one word, voice and flow. And they have a simplified, they actually have a really nice user interface. So that way, then you can put something together. And they actually, I want to say, just in one of their recent updates, made it possible so that you have the ability of a large language model and understanding of processing the information. So whatever I'm saying, it's figuring that out, and you don't have to go through the painful synonym game. But then you can actually insert your own corpus of information securely, so that I only want you to pull the answers from there. I only want you to pull answers from my HR policy, or I only want you to pull from my competitive reports or my information. And then on the backside, it then basically, and this is a very simplified explanation, but then it will then use again an LLM to put that back and generate the answer again in English, or actually whatever language you need, because I know that that's a possibility these days too. But of giving it back to you in natural language, so that way then you're asking the question, it's pulling from the right part of the library, so to speak, and then it's giving you your answer back and saying this is your answer to the question you asked.
So voiceflow.com, I'm on their site right now. It looks like they take inbound phone calls, chat bots, the whole shebang. Fascinating. Yep. So any other things you wanted to mention on this operate leaner thing?
I think if anything, it's just starting to think about if there's something that you're doing 3 times a day or more, think about whether or not that's something for an opportunity for automation. And I think also just thinking about whatever those things are that make you sit and say, oh my gosh, there has to be a better way. I am so sick of doing it this way. That's an opportunity to kind of look within there. But I would also say, as you look at that, make sure that you include the people who actually are doing that stuff if you're a leader, because those are the people who know where, yep, you can definitely expedite that step. Or they will say, you know what, there's actually a couple consequences or implications. If it doesn't go right, let's assess that risk.
Susan Westwater, you have rattle off a whole bunch of tools that most of my audience has never heard of before. And I know that some of them are going to be like, I want to talk to Susan. So first of all, if they want to connect with you on the socials, what's your preferred platform? And then if they want to potentially, engage you, where do you want to send them?
For sure. So socials, LinkedIn. You can find me there. I also am on X only because that's where all the AI kids play.
So is it Susan Westwater on both of those?
Yes. And you can find me that way. And then we also obviously have our website. And one thing I wanted to let folks know is if you want to know more about those tools, because we only talked about a handful, something that Scott and I put together is a bit of what we call our AI toolkit. And you can get that at pragmatic.digital/AI toolkit. And we've gone through about 30 different types of tools, and also then share a little bit more about that framework. And we even talk a little bit about models and what their strengths are. I do caveat that it was released a week ago. So it's as of, that date.
As of June of 2025, when we're recording this. And it's pragmatic.digital/ you said AI toolkit?
Yep.
Susan Westwater, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.